He caressed his Tales of Betrayal, a genuine account of infidelity. Your support is invaluable. As 90% of our viewers have yet to join our community, we invite your support to continue crafting captivating content. We invite you to subscribe and be sure to tap the notification bell. We invite you to share your location with us. Please drop your city in the comments below. I once held the conviction that my life was flawless, or at the very least, I convinced myself that I did. Each morning, I observed my husband, Thomas, depart for work, his routine as unwavering as the dawn. He flourished within the confines of routine, rising at the break of dawn, precisely at 6:30 a.m. With a gentle touch, he pressed a kiss to my forehead before making his way to the station, boarding the same train that whisked him off into the city. For 2 decades, this was the cadence of our lives. To the casual observer, our life appeared to be a picture of beauty. A flawless 2-story home, a meticulously maintained lawn, 2 children, Ethan, our eldest, now embarking on his college journey, and our daughter, who has recently ventured out for university. And then there was me, Helen, the devoted wife, the woman who once harbored dreams of becoming a concert pianist, but ultimately found herself teaching lessons in our sunlit living room. Each morning, once Thomas had departed, I found myself on our balcony, clad in my silk robe, cradling a cup of coffee while observing the train glide past. He often glanced up at me, smiling warmly. How fortunate I am, he would often declare. For an extended period, I allowed him to hold that belief. Yet fortune is a delicate matter. A single delay set off a chain reaction, a seemingly insignificant act of kindness that led Thomas to board the wrong train at the most inopportune moment. He paused to assist a small boy in saving a kitten trapped in a storm drain, forgoing his typical journey. Consequently, he boarded a later train, the one that rolled past our house a quarter of an hour behind its intended schedule. In that moment, the foundations of everything he believed about his existence shattered into a million pieces. Uncertainty lingered in the air as Thomas cast his gaze upward toward our house that day. Perhaps it's just me, perched on the balcony as I often do, or perhaps it's simply nothing at all. Yet what he truly saw was me, standing by the window with another man close behind me. The train thundered by, yet Thomas remained rooted to the spot, his stomach churning with unease. His gaze was fixed, unwavering. He witnessed it all. My posture and demeanor conveyed a message that was unmistakable. It was a vision that broke him apart. He reassured himself that it was merely a figment of his imagination. Perhaps it was merely a play of illumination, or perhaps it was another presence entirely. Yet, beneath the surface, he was aware. Throughout the remainder of the train journey, Thomas remained silent, his fingers clutching his phone with a tension that turned his knuckles pale. He contemplated reaching out, seeking a justification. Yet, an unseen force within him held him back. What if I were to weave a tale untrue? What if I met his gaze head-on and refuted every accusation? As the clock struck evening, he stepped through the threshold, and I welcomed him with the familiar warmth that had become our ritual. A tender smile, a delicate kiss on his cheek, and a soothing dinner's nearly prepared. Dear. And what of Thomas? He regarded me as though I were an unfamiliar face. He chose not to confront me, neither that night nor the following day. Rather, he observed. I believed I was exercising caution, or so I thought. Yet Thomas understood me far too intimately. He began to board the later train home, merely to observe. In the beginning, there existed an absence. Seated at the piano, I found myself in solitude, my fingers dancing gracefully across the keys. He reassured himself that it had merely been an error, a misinterpretation. Yet, just 2 days later, it reappeared before him. A new perspective unfolds, a fresh view. Yet the essence remains unchanged. It wasn't merely an affair I was engaged in. I found myself navigating 2 distinct existences. Little did I know that my husband, ever so methodical and patient, had already charted the course for how this would all conclude. In the days that followed, Thomas observed me with an intensity that was unprecedented. He observed the subtle details. As I sifted through the depths of my closet, I unearthed garments that had long been forgotten, their fabric untouched for years, skirts that cling closer, necklines that dip deeper. As I hummed softly in the kitchen, I found myself glancing at my phone more frequently than usual, a smile gracing my lips at messages I chose not to reveal. On a quiet afternoon, he caught snippets of a phone call drifting in from the hallway. It would be wise to arrive on time. Only 2 hours remain until my husband returns home. Indeed, however, please refrain from parking out front. Merely as a precaution, I chuckled gently, then whispered. In that instant, Thomas understood that I had ceased all efforts to conceal the truth. It was not an error. It was not guilt. I found myself immersed in the experience. That weekend, my mother paid a visit. Claire, a widow possessing a keen wit and an affinity for luxurious fragrances. She maintained a veneer of politeness towards Thomas, yet beneath that facade, he had never grasped the depths of her true self. That evening, following the meal, he took his leave prematurely. Yet he chose not to retire for the night. Instead, he hesitated by the threshold of the living room door. What reached his ears sent a chill coursing through his veins. It's exhilarating, wouldn't you agree? I am filled with a vibrant sense of existence. These men seem to gather in droves for their lessons. They hold me in high regard. It feels as though I've been transported back to my 20s. My mother let out a soft laugh. Exercise caution, my dear. Men become wary when they sense they are being manipulated. Thomas is occupied, excessively innocent. He continues to perceive me as the delicate pianist he rescued from the remnants of my first marriage, as if I am beyond reproach. As long as your happiness is intact, my dear, just exercise a bit of discretion. Conceal your footprints. There's no reason to involve the rest of the family in your activities outside of school. Together, we shared laughter, a mother and her daughter. Yet, in the shadows above, Thomas tightened his fists, a storm brewing within him. In that instant, he resolved to take action. He pondered, she believes me to be a fool. Yet, she remains blissfully unaware of the true identity of her husband. He had no intention of facing me. Not at this moment. Thomas exhibited remarkable patience. He intended to savor each moment. And when he finally unleashed his fury, nothing would remain unscathed. Ethan had not been expected to return that Friday, yet the washing machines in his dormitory were out of order. He yearned for a warm, satisfying meal. He failed to send a message in advance. He was never required to. This remained his home. As he swung the front door wide and called out, he anticipated the familiar sound of my voice, perhaps accompanied by the gentle clatter of dishes in the background. Instead, he caught the faint murmur of whispers, a soft giggle lingering in the air. As he crossed the threshold into the living room, an unsettling sight met his gaze, one that would linger in his mind for all time. Sitting on the couch, I was in close proximity to another man. That young man was one of Ethan's classmates. Ethan's universe shifted dramatically. What on earth? His voice trembled. I shot up, my complexion fading to a ghostly hue. Ethan, what brings you to this place? The young man quickly stood up, apologizing profusely. Yet Ethan averted his gaze entirely. His gaze was fixed upon me. Are you having an affair with someone from my school? While Dad is unaware. I adjusted my clothing, adopting a resolute demeanor. You should have knocked, I said, my voice icy. Yet Ethan was no fool. In that moment, for the very first time, he truly recognized me for who I really am. In the softly lit living room, Ethan stood still, his heart racing as his mother's words echoed in his mind. He remained in disbelief over the events that had just unfolded. The woman who had always been there for him was now making unsettling demands. He felt a strong urge to confront her and seek answers. Yet, he understood that it would alter nothing. Helen had expressed her thoughts unequivocally. She felt no shame. She felt no remorse. And should he summon the audacity to unveil her secrets, she would ensure he faced the consequences. Ethan had always perceived his father as a figure who possessed all the answers. Yet, uncertainty had begun to creep in. Was Dad already aware? Numerical value. If he had, he certainly wouldn't be here now. His father possessed an unwavering pride, an unyielding honesty, and a deep devotion to Helen that rendered him incapable of accepting such a situation. The burden of reality pressed down on Ethan's heart as he seized his backpack and burst out of the house. He craved the fresh embrace of the open air. Upon returning home that night, Thomas was struck by an unsettling feeling that something was amiss. Helen stood there, as she always did, welcoming him with a radiant smile, her arms enveloping him in a comforting embrace. Yet the house exuded a distinct aura. Chillier. Ethan had vanished, his bag absent, his shoes no longer resting by the door. That was peculiar. He typically lingered for dinner during his visits. Was Cliff here? Thomas inquired nonchalantly, placing his briefcase on the ground. Helen responded almost instantly, without a moment's pause. Indeed, he merely dropped in to collect a few items. He mentioned having some plans from his time at school. There was an unsettling quality to her voice that troubled him. Thomas glanced around, his eyes landing on a second wineglass resting on the counter. Helen had already begun placing it in the sink. Yet it existed. With whom had she been sharing drinks? His chest constricted. He could nearly perceive the soft whisper of her voice from the phone call he had eavesdropped on days prior. It would be wise to arrive on time. Only 2 hours remain until my husband returns home. Thomas tightened his jaw and managed to conjure a smile. He found himself unprepared to face her. Not at this moment. He sought further evidence. If he were to accuse her now, she would undoubtedly turn the situation on its head, portraying him as nothing more than a paranoid fool. Thus, he chose to go along with it. They gathered at the dinner table, as they always did, savoring the meal she had lovingly prepared. She inquired about his work, about the events of his day, her smile conveying a sense of normalcy as if nothing had shifted. Yet Thomas was aware of the truth. He had reached the end of his ignorance. Upon returning to his dorm, Ethan found himself unable to concentrate on anything at all. The echoes of his mother's words, her ominous threats, reverberated endlessly in his mind. If you dare to inform your father, I will ensure your downfall. He clenched his jaw, a wave of nausea rolling through him. His father was not worthy of such a fate. How could he simply remain idle and take no action? Yet what options lay before him? He had outgrown his childhood. Though his mother lacked the physical power to restrain him, she wielded the ability to turn his existence into a torment. Reluctantly, he acknowledged the truth. He wasn't prepared to gamble at all. He had to approach this with cunning and strategy. Rather than reacting with anger, Ethan opened his laptop and began to investigate. Who was that individual? The arrogant, indifferent youth who had taken up residence in their home as if it were his own. Ethan had caught merely a fleeting glimpse of him, yet it was sufficient. He scoured social media, seeking out any semblance of familiarity. Though his university boasted a multitude of students, Ethan had spent enough time within its walls to become familiar with the majority of the social circles that thrived here. At that moment, he discovered him. James, a sophomore pursuing a degree in business, was a member of the university's soccer team. Ethan felt a surge of anger coursing through him. He was familiar with this individual. They were not friends, yet their paths had crossed at various parties in the past. At that moment, Ethan found himself witnessing the scene unfold in his own home, alongside his mother. His hands trembled as he navigated through James's posts. Images featuring friends, playful remarks from girls vying for his attention, and, much to Ethan's dismay, a recent update about exclusive piano lessons. He was not alone in this regard. Helen had engaged in this with several men. Ethan shut his laptop with a decisive motion and ran his hands over his face, attempting to quell the surging anger that threatened to consume him. His mother believed she could dominate him, convinced of his fragility. Unbeknownst to her, an unforeseen turn of events loomed on the horizon. In the days that followed, Thomas grew increasingly perceptive. He began arriving home at erratic hours, merely to observe Helen's response. Indeed, she followed through. On a particular evening, he returned home 2 hours ahead of schedule. As he drove into the driveway, he noticed the living room curtains swiftly draw closed. As he stepped through the threshold, Helen stood in the kitchen, her demeanor a blend of feigned surprise and calm composure. "Back home already?" she inquired, her smile strained and somewhat artificial. Yeah, I thought I'd take the afternoon off, Thomas replied with a nonchalant air, placing his keys on the counter. He surveyed his surroundings, searching for any indication that another presence had graced this place. The house was infused with the scent of an expensive cologne, one that did not belong to him. He regarded Helen's ensemble, a silk robe hastily tied, as though she had merely tossed it on in a moment's haste. "Is everything all right?" she inquired with a gentle tone, her head tilting slightly to the side. Thomas nodded, feigning ignorance to the delicate manner in which she placed herself between him and the corridor that led to their bedroom. He strode by her regardless. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar. He nudged it ajar. All appeared as it should, save for one subtle detail, a delicate indentation on the bed, as if a presence had lingered there only moments before. His chest constricted as he pivoted to face Helen, who now stood behind him, observing his every action. He compelled a smile. "I simply wished to retrieve an item from my closet." Helen let out a breath, a hint of relief evident, and Thomas took note of this in his mind. She was aware. She sensed the growing suspicion in his gaze, and that realization compelled her to tread even more cautiously. Ethan had been restraining himself for the past few days, but the dam had finally broken. As dusk settled, he lingered by the entrance of the campus gym, his gaze fixed on the door until James emerged, earbuds nestled in his ears, blissfully oblivious to the world around him. Ethan was swift in his actions. With a firm grip, he seized James's shoulder and pushed him forcefully. James staggered backward, yanking his earbuds free. "What on earth is going on?" Ethan growled. "You were in my house." James's complexion drained of color. "What am I to make of this?" "I'm not quite sure what you mean, my friend. Do not deceive me." Ethan advanced, his fists tightly balled. "Did you really believe I wouldn't recognize you? Did you really believe I missed that self-satisfied expression on your face as you hurried away?" James paused, surveying his surroundings. "Listen, Enough!" Ethan interrupted sharply. "Are you aware of my father's identity? What has he done for her? And what about you? You simply stroll into our home as if it holds no significance?" James let out a sharp breath, his fingers running along the nape of his neck. "I was unaware, okay?" She kept it to herself. "Be quiet." Ethan's voice cut through the air with a piercing clarity. "You will cease. Keep your distance from my family, or I assure you, there will be consequences." James raised his hands high. "Very well, I shall cease." Ethan held his gaze for a heartbeat longer, then finally stepped back. "Excellent." James gave a swift nod before pivoting on his heel and making his way briskly down the path. Yet Ethan had more in store. Though fear may have gripped James, he was not alone in his trepidation. Others shared in his unease. His mother had traversed this path before, and Ethan was resolute in his determination to bring this repugnant cycle to a close, even if it required the obliteration of everything in his wake. Thomas had always taken great pride in his identity as a rational man. He refrained from leveling accusations without substantiation, and he was far from making hasty choices. Yet, the preceding weeks had tested him beyond his breaking point. A shift had occurred within the walls of his home, and it was a truth he could no longer evade. Helen exercised greater caution now. Excessively cautious. She ceased to leave her phone unattended, stopped requesting him to collect dry cleaning at unusual times, and no longer urged him to extend his hours at the office. It seemed as though she was aware of his gaze upon her. Then came Ethan's abrupt disappearances. His son had always shared a deep bond with him, consistently turning to him for trust and guidance. Yet now, whenever Thomas inquired about his well-being, Ethan's responses were brief and cautious. Something felt amiss, and Thomas was determined to uncover the truth. Ethan had devoted the last week to the pursuit of names. He was far from foolish. His mother was not one to act carelessly with just anyone. She exhibited a recurring motif, and he was beginning to discern it. James was not the pioneer, and if Ethan failed to act, he certainly wouldn't be the final one. On a quiet evening, he found himself in his dorm room, the glow of his laptop illuminating the space as he perused through various profiles. Though the journey was fraught with challenges, he managed to uncover a small collection of names. young men from the same university, each linked by unsettlingly similar ties. There were those who boasted of clandestine affairs. Others had shared ambiguous notes regarding confidential gatherings. In that moment, he stumbled upon something that sent a chill through him, a message conveyed through text. One of the individuals he had faced had reached out to him, likely driven by a sense of apprehension. It extends beyond her alone. Another person is aware. There is a figure aiding her in concealing the truth. Ethan felt a chill seep through his veins. Who else participated in this endeavor? Thomas had always excelled at maintaining a tight grip on his emotions. Yet, as he pondered the inconsistencies, the concealed phone calls, the anxious glances, and the peculiar excuses, it became increasingly clear to him that he had been ensnared in a web of denial. He reflected on all the moments he had overlooked, the late-night escapades, the abrupt change in feelings, the mysterious charges on their credit card. It unfolded before his very eyes, yet he remained oblivious to its presence. He sought evidence. He was determined to seize it. Ethan understood that the moment demanded his response. Swift, he possessed a name, one solitary lead. In the stillness of the night, he traced the path of messages to a serene neighborhood across town. The address guided him to a humble apartment complex, appearing unremarkable at first sight. Yet, as he lingered in the shadows, observing, an unexpected sight seized his heart in a vice grip. A car glided into the driveway, and from the driver's side emerged his mother, stepping out with an air of casual ease. Ethan's fists tightened, a storm brewing within him as he observed her make her way to the door. She rapped her knuckles against the door, a single, deliberate knock echoing in the stillness. The door creaked open, and there, on the other side, stood someone Ethan had never anticipated encountering. His uncle. Ethan's heart raced within him, a wild drumbeat echoing in his chest as he remained motionless outside the apartment complex. He anticipated encountering yet another young man, yet another error his mother had committed. Yet, the sight of his own uncle, his father's brother, framed in the doorway, washed over him like a tide of nausea. What was he meant to do at this moment? He crouched behind a parked car, striving to calm his breath. Amidst the soft glow filtering through the apartment window, he caught sight of his mother entering, the door closing quietly behind her. This was not merely an affair. It was a profound betrayal that shattered the very foundation of their family. Upon returning home, Thomas embarked on his own inquiry. After weeks of piecing together the fragments, the puzzle was finally beginning to take shape. The credit card statements, the clandestine phone calls, the abrupt chill in their marriage. Then Ethan had called him, his voice trembling. "Father, I have discovered her." Thomas tightened his grip on the phone. Where might that be? As Ethan relayed the address, Thomas felt a sudden tightness in his throat. His breath momentarily suspended. He was fully aware of the occupant's identity, his very own brother. A betrayal of this magnitude was something he had never anticipated. Thomas navigated the road with an intensity that bordered on frenzy, his grip on the steering while leaving his knuckles pale and taut. His mind surged with a flurry of ideas. For how long had this been unfolding? Had everyone been aware, save for him? Upon his arrival at the apartment, Ethan stood waiting outside. His son's visage was ashen, his jaw set tight. "Father, it's him," Ethan murmured. Thomas felt no need to inquire about the identity. He walked briskly to the door and knocked firmly. In that fleeting instant, silence enveloped the surroundings. At that moment, the door creaked ajar, revealing his brother, Andrew, on the threshold. Andrew's eyes grew wide with disbelief. "Thomas, what brings you here?" Yet, just as he was about to utter another word, Thomas moved past him quickly. In the center of the softly lit living room stood Helen, her expression reflecting shock and remorse. "Thomas, allow me to elucidate." Yet Thomas had no inclination for explanations. The stillness in the room was oppressive. Andrew averted his gaze, unable to confront Thomas's eyes. Helen appeared shaken, but Thomas looked away. "What is the duration?" he inquired, his tone unsettlingly serene. Silence enveloped them, as neither chose to respond. "What is the duration?" he reiterated, his patience fraying at the edges. Helen took a deep breath, her throat tightening. Throughout the span of a year, a single year. For an entire year, his own wife and brother had woven a web of lies, deceiving not just him but their whole family. Thomas exhaled slowly, a deep breath escaping his lips. He had anticipated suffering, fury, even wrath. Yet what enveloped him was nothing but a profound void. "You two deserve each other," he finally said, turning toward the door. Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas, I implore you, do not proceed with this." Yet Thomas had firmly resolved his course of action. He refused to squander another moment on those who had never genuinely cared for him. Several days passed before Thomas took the step to file for divorce. He remained silent, refraining from any outburst. He just turned and left. Ethan distanced himself from both his mother and his uncle. Though the pain ran deep, Thomas and his son discovered a wellspring of strength within one another. Betrayal would not be the measure of their worth. They were determined to heal. This time, they would embrace only those who demonstrated unwavering loyalty.